Today I wanted to give you a brief demonstration on how to apply the map of the eyes and the eyebrows and onto there. There's a couple of ways that this can be done. I'm going to do the simplest one at the moment. And then next week when we get into surfaces, I'll show you a little bit more sophisticated ways of doing this. They're principally the same, but just a little bit different. On this one right here, what you have to do is you have to start with either a Photoshop file, Illustrator file, whatever program you want. And I just used shape layers to create, the eyes and the eyebrows. And then in the background, made kind of a light green color. Maybe it should be more of a blue. So instead, let me just select that. Since television screens tend to look a little bit on the bluish side, I'll click something here. So we'll change that a little bit. That looks pretty good. And I'll use the fill bucket to fill the background. So I have it like so. Okay. What I strongly recommend that you do, how many of you know Illustrator or Photoshop just a little bit? A little? No, not at all? Any kind of paint program, any kind of drawing program where you can save into, what you need to be able to save it is at least save it as a JPEG. If the program that you're using will not save it as a TGA file, then you can always open the file in Photoshop and you don't have to know anything more than that. You open it up and then do a save as and save it as a TGA. For whatever reason, Lightwave is inconsistent. It should open JPEGs, but sometimes it doesn't, and it only accepts TGA files, which are the old Targa files. I don't know why that is. But your original, and since I like to work in Photoshop, remains my Photoshop document. So that extension is PSD. And the reason I say that that's important is because it has all of my layers, and all of these are non-destructive. They can be edited, and I can change them any way I like. The next step will be to save a copy of that file as a JPEG or a TGA file. And you might just want to save it as both. Now when you do that, it flattens it, and all of the layers, all the effects go away. That's why I strongly recommend you have your original file as Photoshop so that it retains all of those original layers so you can go back and edit it should you need to. When you're creating your files, since image maps are brought in as squares anyway, it's best to start off with a square, and that's what I've done. What we can do is we can go to image size. When you start off, and 512 by 512 pixels is plenty for most projects. And if you want a high resolution image at 300 pixels per inch, so it'll withstand enlargement, and to render a large image, I would strongly recommend that. In some instances, 72 pixels per inch is all that's necessary. But 512 by 512 pixels should do you just fine. Okay? So, square format, make sure that it's an RGB, red, green, blue, not CMYK. 300 pixels per inch for high quality image is just fine. And then we're in good shape. Now I can save for, I'll do File, and I will, where am I going to go? I'm just going to do a save as, and it will be as a copy so that I don't ruin my other file, and I will save it as a Targa file here so that all, and I don't need the word copy since I'm changing the file format here a little bit. And I'm going to save it in my content folder, and I'll save it in images, which is a good place to do it, and I'll save in there. Okay? 24-bit pixel is just fine. 24 bits per pixel. Does everybody understand what that is? 24 bits per pixel, 16 bits per pixel. If you don't, let me know. It's not a big deal. 24 bits per pixel means that you have the possibility of 2 to the 24th power of colors, which means millions. So when we work with grayscale images here, 2 to the 8th power, 256 will probably be all that it can handle. It can't handle 2 to the 16 of grayscale. But in color, 2 to the 24th works just fine. And so a 24-bit or millions of colors, because 2 times 2 times 2 times 2, 24 times, winds up with millions. 2 to the 16th is thousands. 2 to the 8th is 256. So if you use an 8-bit, that's 256 possible colors, actually 255. 2 to the 16th power, that's generally how it jumps. It practically doubles. You have thousands of possibilities or tens of thousands of possibilities, and 2 to the 24th, you have millions of possibilities of color per pixel. So the more possibilities you have per pixel of color, the higher definition image, right? However, there is a point where it makes no difference because our eyes cannot detect anything more than that. 2 to the 24th is about it. Although there is 48-bit color, but a lot of that has nothing to do with the number of colors per pixel. It has to do with alpha channels. It has to do with shadows. It has to do with transparency. It has to do with a lot of other things that are not related to the color possibilities itself. So 2 to the 24th works just fine, or 24-bit. So I've got this saved as a Targa file, and I have it saved as a Photoshop file. Now I can go back to Mike. I already have a placeholder for the screen, and I can either apply this inside the modeler or in layout. It makes no difference. So what I need to do, though, is I need to make sure that I have my surface editor up, and I'm going to make sure that I have the screen selected. That's the screen, right? That's a little green screen that I have selected here. And now, instead of just color, I want to apply an image map to this. That's what I've created, an image that's going to be applied like a sticker onto the surface. To do so, I click T for texture. E's here are envelopes, and in this class we will not be using envelopes. Does Chris use them in the animation class? No? Well, what you can do with textures is they can be animated over time. So let's say, for example, you've created a little police car or something. It's got the little red light on top, that changes color or something like that, or spins around. But maybe it's changing color over time. Or you have blinking lights. There we go. That fade in and fade out, fade in, fade out. Well, they can be animated in envelopes over time, and that's what all the E's stand for. You can create some really interesting textures and animate them, do that. But since this isn't the animation class, that's why I asked if Chris did that, because that would be a fun thing to animate. You can create some fun things. But to create more complex textures, more realistic textures, not only are you going to use procedurals, but you're going to use image maps, and that's what we're doing. We're taking photographs and applying them to the surface. Other examples, aside from this, the face, would be if you wanted something to, I think the example I cited a week or so ago is if you want your surface to look like wood, and you want it to look like, real wood, rather than create procedurals, and there are some that sort of look like wood, but they look like computer-generated wood. They don't look like real wood. The best way to do it would be to get photographs of the kind of wood that you want. Is it highly polished, lacquered wood? Is it weathered wood that you would find on the beach where the grain is kind of gnarly and it's matte finish and that sort of thing? To get photographs of that. And color, and then also in Photoshop, what we'll do is I'll show you how to take black and white images from that to utilize as bump maps, so that a smooth, highly polished piece of wood, you wouldn't have a bump map. But for maybe a rough textured wood where the grain, where you can actually see the undulation of the grain, you would want to use that same image to create highs and lows in grayscale, and we can apply that as a bump map later on, and it will actually appear as a rough piece of wood. I mean, it'll look really believable when you do it that way. So that's the next section of this class, is to work on surface textures. And this is a nice introduction. So now what I can do for the face is I click T for texture, and what I want to do is the layer type, I want it to be image map. Blending mode normal, layer opacity 100%, projection planar. It's just a flat plane that's going to go on here. And now I need to select my image. So what I'm going to do, and notice I already have some images that I've used for reflection maps, that I've used for surface textures on some of the other chrome and brass surfaces. I don't want any of those. I'm going to go to load image. I'm going to go back to my desktop, and I need to find my current content folder for this semester. Go into images, and there's Mike's face. And I click OK, and there it is. Okay? Now, the next thing that you need to do is you need to determine which texture axis works. We should be able to see it in here, and I don't see anything at the moment. It looks correct here. Notice in the preview, see how the face is become visible? It might be that it needs to be resized is all, because it by default it might be way too large, or it might be way too small. So if it's not the right texture, you know, I don't know which of these. I'm going to use the default Z and make sure and hope that it works. The next thing that I'm going to do is, because I don't want it to tile, because surface is tile by default. What that means is that if you want actually a tiled surface, like a wallpaper kind of stippling effect, you can have the image repeat automatically again and again and again until it fills the entire surface. Or if you only want the surface to be filled once with that image, then what we need to do is select Reset here, so that it resets the image, and then we select down here Automatic Sizing. That's what I needed to do. Notice that it shrinks or expands to fit the size of the image that I need. Okay, or the space involved. I will talk more. See how that shrank in size here? What this sphere represents is 1 meter right now. This can change. We can change the settings. But this is where later on, when you do apply lots of surface maps, lots of image maps that are textures like this, in order to pay attention to the correct scaling of texture to the image or the model you've created, it will be important to know approximately what size your model is, so that you can scale it accordingly inside our texture editor. This happened to work quite nicely to use auto sizing. If I decided I want the face a little larger, that can be done too. If I want to change the position of it, that can be done too. I can come down here to the bottom and select Scale, and notice it has the automatic sizes in millimeters here, but watch what happens when I just change this. Whoa, that went too nuts. Let's go down here. Kind of strange, huh? But you can stretch and, you know, change these until they fit accordingly. We only need to change the X and Y, like so. Notice how I'm making it bigger to fit. And then I can also select the position of it, and I can move it. So I'll move it along the Y. I didn't want to do that. Let me go back to Z. Oh, what am I doing here? Wrong. I didn't need to click there. I just need to click here, and I'm going to move it down on the Y a little bit so that it really fills the screen, like so. I can come back to the scale. Now, if I wanted to, I could make this a little bit smaller. It really should be a little bit smaller, like so. And then I need to go back to position, and I need to move it up a little bit. Whoop, not quite so much. So I'm just using the spinners here to change the position just a little bit. Not too much. Let's put in 0. What the heck? Let's put in -10. Whoops, that should have been minus 10 millimeters. How about -20 millimeters? Let's do that. That should do it. Perfect. So I'm happy with that. Okay, so now I've applied an image to my surface now instead of using procedurals, which is the computer generated textures that we've used so far. Now, to change this a little bit more, what I can do to make this even look a bit more like a television monitor, the little television monitors emit light, don't they? Right? There's that bluish cast that you get from that. Well, let's go ahead and I'm going to save this. Let's send it over to layout so that I can do some test renders here. Okay, let's look at this from the camera view. And let's zoom in a little bit and see what I have. And I know that this isn't the best perspective view or whatever, but I can, let's move the camera a little bit, move it closer. And let's also move it down a little bit, because I would just want to focus on the screen for a minute. Whoops, I didn't want to do that. Okay. So let's do a test render. Let's go to render. Let's make sure that I have render options set. I want to make sure that I have image viewer up and make sure that I turn on shadows and transparency and reflection and refraction and all that good stuff. And let's go ahead and just hit render frame and see what I get here. Okay, now there's shadows being cast on his face, and there's nothing that I can do about that. Unless I put a light source in there to take the shadows out. And that might be something that you might have to do. Does everybody understand why this looks like so? This is casting the shadow, and this is casting the shadow on this. Now, it looks pretty flat, but if I want this to look more like a bright television monitor, like it's emitting light, it may not be emitting light, but like it looks like it's emitting light, which texture? Let me go back up here. Let's go to Surface Editor. If I select the screen here, what do you think I need to add to this in order to make it look like it's emitting light? We did this once before with a table and lamp. Luminosity, exactly. So let's bump up luminosity a little bit, maybe a little bit more. Start at maybe 35%. And render it again, see what it looks like. And all you're doing is kind of a test, and it looks a bit brighter than it did before. Doesn't look too different. Maybe I should actually put a light in there, you know, so it looks like it's emitting light. That would help too. Could probably crank this up even a little bit more. Let's turn this up to maybe 50%, 60% and see what happens. Let's go ahead and render frame once again. So what it's doing is it's making it pretty bright. Okay? Wait, what? Say again?
Could it be set up that it doesn't receive shadow from the
Oh, you mean turn that off? Yes, I can do that so that it doesn't receive shadows. That would be another option. But you have to be careful. Let's try that. Let's go back over to Modeler for a minute. And let me think a minute here. No. I would have to make this a separate object. Let me go back over to switch to layout again. What he's suggesting is that when we look at lights and we look at light properties and we look at shadows, okay, we can also, in objects, notice that I just have Mike. I want Mike to receive a shadow. If I exclude Mike, that's what it's going to look like. There's going to be no light.
Yeah.
So the only way around that, if I leave this as is, would be to make that a separate object. I don't know that that's such a good idea. What I can do, though, is I can put a light in there, another light source. And one of the things that you can do with light sources is that you can play tricks. And you can turn off shadows so that the light illuminates, but it does not cast shadows on anything. So that might be something that we try. And I can put in just a little round light to see what happens here. So let's give this a try. Let's close that. I'm going to hide this for a moment. Let's move this over here for a minute. Let's view this from the top view for a minute so I can see what I'm doing. Let's go ahead, and I want to look at items. And what I want to do is I want to add lights. You can have as many lights as you want. I don't recommend using too many. Oftentimes, maybe 3 lights are good. You want your main light, which would be from the front, maybe the front left. You would want a light from the side, which would be a fill light, as well as maybe a backlight, which fills too. So that it depends on the kind of the light, the mood that you want. If you want really dramatic lighting, you wouldn't have one from behind. And you would turn down the fill light a little bit, and you'd have just one main light from the front. If you want nice even lighting, then you crank up the fill light a little bit, and from the shadow side of the face or whatever it is, it will lighten it up, and you'll have fewer shadows, sort of thing. So maybe minimum 3 lights. We'll call this point light, because that's what it is. But and it puts it right in the middle. I'm going to move it forward just a little bit here. So it's in here. Let's look at this from the front view. Front view. Yeah, it's hard to tell. And all I'm going to do is now look at this back from camera view. Notice how the shadows, we'll see in a minute if they're gone. Let's go ahead and render again. Go back to render frame, and see what it does. It might blow everything out and look horrible. See how the shadows are much lighter now? It doesn't remove them entirely, but you might want some. Show that it is inset. Where did I have it? Down here. There we go. So this looks much brighter now, and watch, if I switch to the other layer, see how the shadow is darker? And I could go back and I could turn up the intensity of the light a little bit, and that would affect it too. Let's go back to the screen and let's look at some other features. I don't want to glow, because then it would just glow around the edges. No, there isn't too much I can do at the moment, not anything more that I can think of offhand. Obviously, I need to turn up anti-aliasing to smooth some of the rough edges out, things like that, change the camera angle. But in a nutshell, that's pretty much how you apply an image to a surface. And you can apply a separate image to every polygon. And later on, we'll show other ways of applying surfaces, UV maps, which are used very frequently in gaming, when you design models for games and that sort of thing. They're used for all sorts of things, but we can show you how to use those, as well as color maps and weight maps and all sorts of stuff. That's pretty much it. Does that help everybody? Does it sort of make sense what I did? If it doesn't, this is a pretty short I've only talked maybe a little bit less than a half an hour. I'll have that up tonight. When you get to that point, if you're still struggling with it, I'll help you with it so that you have the face in there. Use whatever program you can, or if you can find a picture of a face that you want to put in place of it, because if you don't know Illustrator or Photoshop or anything, then show me that picture, and then what we'll do is open the picture and crop it in Photoshop and just use that, and we'll apply it. So it doesn't have to look exactly like this, okay? Any questions? No? Okie doke. Okay, that's it. Keep working. And I should have this up tonight.